What if your love was put to the ultimate test? Imagine standing at a crossroads: loyalty or temptation. 60% of relationships fail due to trust issues, but what if the one you loved pushed you to prove it? Today, you'll witness a heart-wrenching moment when a woman must choose between love and betrayal. Stay tuned, because the decision she makes will change everything. If you're loving the content and want more of these inspiring stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring more amazing videos straight to you. Don't forget to ring the bell so you're always the first to know when we post new content. Thanks for being a part of this journey. The rain tapped steadily against the window as Onie stepped into the room, carrying a bottle of wine with effortless ease. His presence was magnetic, his movements calculated yet casual, as though he belonged there without question. His eyes locked onto Amoka, who stood at the window, her posture weary but guarded. She didn't turn to greet him, her silence speaking volumes. Onie's soft smile was disarming as he set the bottle down, his voice smooth and laden with intent. He spoke of companionship and support, weaving his words carefully to touch the fragile edges of her vulnerability. Amoka's initial resistance was firm, her polite yet tired voice hinting at a boundary she was unwilling to cross. But Onie wasn't one to retreat easily. His words deepened, pressing gently but persistently on the cracks he sensed within her. He questioned her strength, her sacrifices, and the weight she carried for Chijioke. His voice, now softer, became a whisper of temptation, offering her a glimpse of a life free from the burdens she had grown accustomed to bearing. The tension in the room grew palpable. Amoka's gaze flickered toward Chijioke, who sat silently in his wheelchair. His clenched fist and the rigid set of his jaw betrayed the storm of emotions raging within him. Onie's words weren't just an observation, they were a calculated challenge to the life she had chosen, the promise she had made. For a fleeting moment, the conflict within Amoka was visible: her exhaustion against her loyalty, her desire for relief against her unwavering sense of duty. Yet, even as her resolve wavered, something deeper within her refused to let go. Amoka stood taller, her voice trembling but steady as she turned to face Onie. She chose her words carefully, her declaration firm despite the turmoil she felt. Her decision to remain loyal to Chijioke was not made without pain, but it was made with conviction. Onie's smile faltered briefly, his charm slipping, but he masked it with a nod before retreating, leaving behind the weight of his words and the shadow of temptation lingering in the air. As the door closed, the room was left in heavy silence. Amoka's heart ached with the strain of what had transpired, her gaze meeting Chijioke's. His eyes, filled with unspoken guilt and relief, mirrored her inner turmoil. The rain outside continued its relentless rhythm, a somber accompaniment to the unspoken emotions that hung between them. Amoka stood at the edge of a precipice, her heart torn between the weight of her promises and the tantalizing allure of freedom that Onie's words offered. The years of commitment to Chijioke had taken their toll, leaving her weary and emotionally drained. Onie's presence, his smooth voice, and the subtle promise of something different, something easier, felt like a balm to her exhaustion. Yet, that same allure was unsettling, awakening a conflict within her that she had fought hard to suppress. Her gaze shifted to Chijioke, whose silent suffering mirrored her own. She had vowed to stay by his side, to shoulder the burden they both carried. But in the quiet moments of despair, Onie's words pressed on her vulnerabilities, making her question whether her sacrifices were slowly eroding her sense of self. The temptation was there, undeniable and persistent, urging her to consider a life where she wasn't tethered by duty. Still, something deep within Amoka resisted. Despite the cracks in her resolve, she found strength in the love that had bound her to Chijioke. The pain of her circumstances was real, but it was not enough to break the promise she had made. With trembling resolve, she met Onie's gaze and rejected his advances, reaffirming her loyalty even as her heart bore the scars of the choice. Her decision was not without cost, but it was a testament to the depth of her character and the power of her commitment. Chijioke sat in silence, his body rigid and his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair as he watched the scene unfold. Each word from Onie was like a dagger, cutting deeper into his already fragile sense of security. He had set this moment in motion, crafting it as a test of Amoka's loyalty, yet the reality of it was far more painful than he had anticipated. Her hesitation, her weariness, and the flicker of temptation in her eyes tore at him, filling him with a bitter cocktail of guilt and fear. He wanted to trust her, to believe that the promises she had made were unshakable, but his insecurities had taken root too deeply. This test, meant to reassure him, now felt like a betrayal of its own kind, manipulative and cruel. As he watched Onie inch closer to Amoka, his breath caught, his chest tightening with a mix of panic and regret. He saw the conflict in her, the way Onie's words preyed on her vulnerabilities, and it made him question the fairness of what he had orchestrated. When Amoka finally spoke, her voice trembling but resolute, Chijioke felt an immense wave of relief wash over him. She had chosen him, despite everything. Yet, that relief was quickly overshadowed by the weight of what it had cost her and what it said about him. He couldn't ignore the moral implications of his actions or the pain he had inflicted on the woman he loved. Though she had passed the test, the scars it left behind were a stark reminder of his own shortcomings. As the room fell into heavy silence, Chijioke was left to grapple with the consequences of his choices, the guilt of his doubts, and the fragile relief of her loyalty. Amoka's decision resonated in the quiet room like a final, irrevocable choice. With unwavering conviction, she rejected Onie's advances, her voice trembling but firm. The words hung in the air, a testament to her loyalty to Chijioke, even as the emotional weight of that loyalty bore down on her. She had chosen to stay, to honor the promise she had made, but the toll it took on her was undeniable. Onie's temptation, though powerful, had not been enough to sway her. Her commitment to Chijioke, however, had come at the cost of her own peace and happiness. As the door clicked shut behind Onie, the atmosphere in the room thickened with tension. Each person was left to wrestle with their own emotions. Chijioke, still seated in his wheelchair, felt a complex blend of relief and guilt. His plan had worked. Amoka had passed his test, but now the weight of what he had done crushed him. He had wanted reassurance, but the consequences of orchestrating such a test were far more than he had anticipated. Was it worth it? Had he betrayed her trust in the process? Amoka, standing tall but inwardly fractured, reflected on the painful choice she had made. She had honored her commitment, but the emotional toll had stripped her of something more precious than she was willing to admit. The sacrifice was her own, and it was one she would carry with her in silence, a burden that would shape the rest of her journey. Onie's departure left a lingering shadow in the room, his true intentions never fully revealed, leaving Amoka and Chijioke to question what had driven him and what it meant for them. His words, laced with temptation, were a mirror to their own insecurities and fears, and now, they were left to confront the aftermath. The moral ambiguity of the situation loomed large. Was Chijioke justified in testing Amoka's loyalty, or had he crossed a line that could never be undone? What did Onie really want, and how far would he go to manipulate a woman already torn by her own emotional burdens? And finally, at what cost did loyalty come, and was Amoka's devotion truly worth the sacrifices she had made? The answers were elusive, leaving the characters and the audience with a haunting sense of unresolved tension, as the consequences of their actions continued to ripple through their lives. Amoka stood tall, her heart racing but her resolve unshaken. Onie's words hung in the air, tempting her, testing her, but she knew what she had to do. She loved Chijioke no matter the trials they had faced, no matter the strain. In the face of Onie's persistent pressure, she didn't falter. With every ounce of strength she had, she looked him squarely in the eyes and said, "No." Her voice wasn't just firm, it was the sound of a promise, a vow she had made long ago. "I love my husband," she added, each word sharper than the last. And I won't betray him. You need to leave now. The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of her decision pressing down on everyone. Amoka had made her choice not out of obligation, but out of love. Despite the temptation to escape her struggles, despite the easy path Onie offered, she knew that true love didn't come with shortcuts. It was about standing by each other, even when it felt impossible. Onie's frustration flashed across his face, but it didn't matter. Amoka had already made her decision, and there was nothing he could say to change it. Her loyalty was unbreakable, her commitment to Chijioke stronger than anything else. She had chosen to stay true to her heart, and no one least of all Onie could take that from her. Chijioke sat in the corner of the room, his hands tightly gripping the arms of his wheelchair, his heart a tangled mess of emotions. He had been waiting for this moment, the moment Amoka would make her choice. And as he heard her words, his chest swelled with relief. She had chosen him, his heart felt lighter, a part of him thankful beyond measure. But that relief was quickly followed by a suffocating guilt. He had orchestrated this entire situation, pushing Amoka into a painful corner to test her loyalty. The very thing that had brought him comfort now crushed him with its weight. What kind of man had he become to put the woman he loved through such an ordeal? His mind raced, questioning his actions. Was her love worth this kind of test? Had he hurt her beyond repair? As he watched Amoka stand tall, strong in her decision, the guilt gnawed at him. He hadn't trusted her. He hadn't believed in the strength of her love, so he had forced her into a position where she had to prove it. Now, seeing her face so brave, yet so weary, he realized just how much damage his insecurities had caused. She had passed his test, but at what cost? Onie's frustration was evident in the way his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. His plan had failed. The words he had hoped would break Amoka's resolve had only strengthened it. With a final, sharp glance at her, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him with a resounding finality. The sound echoed through the quiet house, leaving behind an oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air. In that stillness, Amoka felt the weight of her choice crash down on her. Her body trembled, not from fear but from the emotional toll of what she had just done. She had rejected Onie, his offer, his temptation, his promises. But in doing so, she felt the strain of years of loyalty, years of sacrifice, press against her chest. She had chosen Chijioke, yes, but the cost of that choice was more than she had anticipated. Her heart ached, torn between the love she had for her husband and the bitter realization of the emotional manipulation she had endured. She was exhausted physically, emotionally, spiritually. The years of standing by Chijioke, despite everything, had worn her down. The constant battle between love and pain, devotion and hurt, had left its mark. Even as she stood firm in her decision, Amoka couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost. The love she had once felt so pure and unshakable now seemed tainted, a shadow of what it had been. She had chosen to stay true to her commitment, but the road ahead was uncertain. Would they ever find their way back to the love they once shared, or was this moment the beginning of a quiet unraveling? Chijioke's heart weighed heavily as he watched Amoka stand there, her eyes filled with a sadness that cut deeper than any words could. The silence between them was thick, each moment stretching on, filled with the unspoken truth of what had just transpired. He had put her through so much, tested her loyalty in the cruelest way possible. And now, the cost of that decision was clear. The guilt was suffocating, a constant reminder of how far he had gone to seek reassurance. "I'm so sorry, Amoka," he whispered, his voice thick with regret. "I never should have done this to you. I was wrong. I thought I needed to test you. But in doing so, I hate you. I made you feel like you weren't enough, like I didn't trust you. And for that, I'm so sorry." His words hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. He couldn't undo what he had done, but he needed her to know how deeply he regretted it. His eyes searched hers, filled with remorse and desperation. Amoka's gaze softened, though her heart was heavy with the weight of the past few days. She had stood by him, stayed true to him, even when the pressure was unbearable. Yet, hearing Chijioke admit what he had done to her didn't make the pain go away. She had always believed in their love, in the strength of their bond, but this test had shattered something within her. The trust that should have been unwavering had been broken. "I don't know if I can ever forget this, Chijioke," Amoka said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "What hurts the most is that you didn't trust me. You put me through all of this just to see if I'd stay. You made me doubt myself, made me question whether my love for you was enough." Her words stung, but they were honest. She was hurt, deeply so, but there was a part of her that still cared, still wanted to heal what had been broken. "But," she continued, looking at him with a mixture of sadness and determination, "we can't just pretend this didn't happen. We need to rebuild. We need to find a way to move forward. Together. But it's going to take time. And it's not going to be easy." Chijioke's heart clenched at her words, but he understood. He knew that the road ahead wouldn't be simple, that the scars of his actions would linger for a long time. But hearing her say that there was still hope, that there was still a chance to rebuild, was all he needed to hear. He just had to prove, through his actions, that he was worthy of the love she was still willing to give. Chijioke sat in the silence that followed Amoka's words, his mind racing, trying to grasp the enormity of what had happened. He could see the sadness in her eyes, the weight of the hurt he had caused, and it made him question everything. Could their relationship ever be the same again? Had he broken something beyond repair? The uncertainty gnawed at him like a persistent ache. No amount of apologies or regret could undo the pain he had inflicted on her, and the thought of losing her, after everything, seemed like an unbearable reality. Amoka, though still hurt, stood there with a quiet resolve, her gaze firm but gentle. She wasn't sure how the future would unfold either, but one thing was clear, she wasn't ready to give up on them just yet. The love she had for Chijioke had been tested, stretched to its limits, but there was still something deep within her that believed they could heal. The road ahead would be long, and the scars would remain, but she was willing to try. "I don't know what comes next, Chijioke," Amoka said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "But we have to start somewhere. We can't just let everything fall apart without giving it a chance." Her words were a quiet promise, a flicker of hope amidst the overwhelming uncertainty. Chijioke met her gaze, his heart aching with guilt but also with a flicker of something else, hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They both knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but in that moment, there was still a chance. As the silence lingered, both of them standing there in the quiet weight of their emotions, the future of their relationship hung in the balance. The path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain, they would try. And that, for now, was enough. And that brings us to the final chapter of this powerful story. If you've enjoyed this journey and the twists and turns along the way, I'd love to hear from you. Did you find the story impactful? What was your favorite part? Drop a comment below and let me know which country you're watching from. I'm always excited to connect with viewers from around the world. If you haven't yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming stories. Your support means the world to us and helps us create even more incredible content just for you. Thank you for being a part of this community, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.